Thank you all. I've recently, as an environment lawyer, had a lot of interface with the journalism profession because of the rains. I was interviewed, I think, for a 2-week period, almost 3 times a day, either in person or on Zoom. And it's almost every year there's seasons when we mistakenly call this the Lahore smog season. There are a lot of interviews. I've already started giving interviews on what is a regional air pollution health crisis. And then every year when COP happens, the Conference of Parties for Climate Change, especially after Sharm el-Sheikh a few years ago when Pakistan's participation at COP was quite active. So that you start getting phone calls from people to be on television. And I just want to, before I get into my remarks, just mention that when it came to the rains in August and September, a lot of the questions I got repeatedly were concerning whether or not India had released water from its dams. Almost in ignorance of the fact that the rains that hit India's Uttarakhand and Himachal and their occupied Jammu and Kashmir were quite unusual, There is no weather attribution on it, how much of it was climate change, but we do know that an unprecedented number of western disturbance winds, ye hawa jo Mediterranean se aati hai, which usually appears in the winters, found itself, we had, I think, over 17 or 19 western disturbance winds in August alone that collided with the monsoon winds that are more or less in the opposite direction, pushing them northwards and into areas and mountain ranges where where those rains normally don't fall. That's why there were flash floods in KPK as well. That weather pattern was replicated itself then. And what was unprecedented because of this collision was the fact that for the first time in recorded history, monsoon rains were pushed over the mountains and it rained monsoon rains in the Tibetan plateau. These questions belied the fact that even if India had, with spite, released water from its dams to flood Pakistan, which it can't do technically, it ignored the fact that with the Bhakra and Pong dams being released, what are called controlled releases, over 500 villages between Bhatinda and Kasur drowned in Indian Punjab. Hundreds of thousands of people had to be relocated. When it comes to air pollution, today's Dawn front page says that air pollution in Lahore is expected to rise because of firecrackers or Diwali that's taking place in India. Yesterday's Tribune from Chandigarh, you can look it up online, the Chandigarh Tribune, yesterday's news from there is that crop burning from Pakistan is causing air pollution in India. And when I'm spoken to about COP, the question is, how much money is Pakistan going to get? It's almost inevitably. Kitne paise milenge? Loss and damage fund ban gaya hai na, where's the money? All of these belie a lack of technical and also environmental knowledge. When you're going to be reporting the environment, you have to be familiar with how the environment works. And it's easy enough and often incorrect to pick up narratives. Ke India se aa raha hai pani. India pani chhod raha hai. And it's a narrative that's developed because of our understanding of the Indus Water Treaty, which is completely unrelated to how river systems work, the geomorphology of rivers, where the impact of human activity on rivers changes their shape, often miles from where the intervention happened and often decades or centuries after the intervention happens. We don't know these things, but you have to come to this stage relatively better prepared and willing to question the dominant narratives कि इंडिया से आ रहा है या हमें पैसे मिलेंगे. जब कॉप की बारी आती है तो कॉप के बारे में हम कहते हैं कि जी पाकिस्तान is a vulnerable country, we have very few emissions, तो पैसे दो. And it's the dominant narrative of sorts. But thank you for letting me get that off my chest. We know that climate change is caused by greenhouse gases. We know that greenhouse gases are produced, by and large, by about 2/3 of the world's greenhouse gases are produced when you take something out of the ground and burn it. Chahe wo lakdi ho, gas ho, tel ho, diesel ho, it is a fossil fuel. You're taking it from the ground, you're burning it primarily for our heating, our energy, and our transportation needs. And these greenhouse gases can trap the sun's heat in the atmosphere and are rapidly raising temperatures on Earth. The other third of greenhouse gas emissions comes from land use and our food systems, what we eat. And please consider this, it's 2025 today. 100 years ago in 1925, it would have been impossible to have a cheeseburger in Pakistan. And the fact that you can get one, now just reflect on this, I don't want to go into it too long. The fact that you can get one now for 500 rupees in Pakistan shows you how wrong our food systems have become. It would have been impossible 100 years ago. Fridge nahi tha. How would you have saved the onions and the tomatoes and kept the lettuce fresh? Just think about it. Our food systems and what we eat also produces a huge amount of greenhouse gases. And these gases have, the Earth's ecosystem has been in balance since at least the last ice age, about 110, 150,000 years ago. Humans have been on the Earth longer than that, but really the stability of the ecosystem started with the last ice age. And that's really when human beings do a number of remarkable things. We discover fire, we invent the wheel, we domesticate the ox, and we invent the plow. These four things allow you to produce more food than is necessary for subsistence living, and allowed human beings to develop a civilization which all of us enjoy. Chahe wo aapko pasand ho ya na ho, we live in a global civilization with different cultures peppered around the world. But it has been because of the Earth's stable ecosystem allowing us to produce more food or as necessary for our culture. What greenhouse gases have done and are doing are destroying that stability, that ecosystem, that thing that supports our civilization. Everything else starts from that very basic ecosystem being stable. If that ecosystem is not stable, if we don't have summers and winters, if we don't have monsoon rains, we won't be able to produce the type of nutrition that we are used to now to enjoy this civilization, whether you like it or not. And it is this very threat of civilizational collapse that brought countries together in 1992 to sign the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It has one objective. The UNFCCC seeks to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions at a level that will prevent dangerous anthropogenic, which is human-made interference in the Earth's ecosystem. That's its objective. And in order to give that objective life, back in, I think, 1996, at the Japanese city of Kyoto, the Conference of Parties, the signatories to the UNFCCC, the COP, as it were, agreed to a protocol that set, what's called the Kyoto Protocol, that set mandatory emission limits, especially for developed countries, so that they would stabilize greenhouse gas emissions. Notably and famously, the United States did not join the Kyoto Protocol. The George Bush at the time, the elder Bush, said that he would not do anything to interfere with, the American way of life. I remember that's what he said. Nothing will let me interfere with the American way of life. I'm not going to sign. And please remember this, because reducing emissions, we're a small emitting country. It's not our problem. But if you're a big emitting country, reducing emissions means changing your lifestyle. So a politician saying, "Okay, I want to maintain or reduce emissions in any country," is telling the people in that country, you can't buy your cars, you can't use your dishwashers the way you do, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. Please understand, and that's what makes it difficult, because no one is willing to change the way they live, especially people who aspire to be the beacons of freedom and democracy in the world. Apart from the objective of the UNFCCC, there are a few principles that emerged on how this stabilization would occur. I mean, different countries have different economic powers, there are different levels of riches, different countries are vulnerable in different ways. And so this idea was grown that different countries would have different common but differentiated responsibilities. And broadly speaking, developed countries, countries with a healthy economic system, whereas basically countries who had spent their industrialization spewing greenhouse gases and making money, I'll come to this point in a second, were required to reduce their emissions. In countries like Pakistan, which with relatively less emissions and more vulnerability, were required to prepare for climate change. But beyond this, and very importantly, it's not just mitigation and adaptation.